I work um, I work a lot with international students in different ways. For example, I offer the orientation to the library every summer to new international students. Um, and a part of the team organizing this event. Very excited to see you here. And feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the library at any point. You can look up my name um, and you can find my contact information, which I'm going to share in the chat as well. So welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Burns. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the lead for Democratic Engagement and the Big Ten Voting Challenge at the Ginsburg Center on campus. And so very happy to be here with you all today. Thanks for joining us. And in a few minutes, I'll be walking you through kind of an overview of what's coming up with the 2020 election. And we'll talk a little bit about that process and just what to expect during very much unexpected times. So we'll go through that and work through that together.
Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Hi, my name is Catherine Morse, and my pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the Government Information Librarian at the Hatcher Graduate Library. And so I help people find government documents, government information, and do kind of government and law and policy research.
Great, thank you. Oh, and I realized I didn't introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Wagner. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a program manager at the International Center, and I work on DE&I initiatives and cultural and intercultural programming. So thank you all for joining. And just to quickly go over the agenda, we're going to go through a presentation to give you all some background and more in-depth knowledge about the presidential election and how elections work in the US. And then we'll go into some discussion section towards the end just to maybe put it into context or answer any questions that you have. So I will turn it over to Erin to start with the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to share my screen. All right. And can everyone see that? If you can just give a nod or a thumbs up. Awesome. All right. Thanks, y'all. All right. So here we go. Election 2020. As I think we all know, Election Day is fast approaching. Just a little bit less than 4 weeks at this point. We have the one and only vice presidential debate this evening and potentially 2 more presidential debates coming up. So a lot of activity going on around and leading up to the election over the next about 3.5 weeks or so. And that is what I'd like to start by sharing with you today. Some 2020 election basics. So let's take a look and see, to start, who and what is on the ballot this year. Of course, we know that we have a major presidential election coming up. That takes place in the US every 4 years. And that is something that when we think about what folks who are eligible to vote will be voting on, that's usually top of mind, right? The president and the vice president, they tend to come with the most kind of glitz and glamour, the most media coverage. So we know those folks will be on the ballot this year. Various states will also see US senators and US representatives or congresspeople, as they're also known. And so those are the positions at the federal level that folks will be seeing. And then at our state level of government, and again, this will vary state by state, some folks will see state senators and state house members or state representatives. In Michigan, we'll also see some candidates for our Michigan Supreme Court, very consequential, very important positions. Our State Board of Education, and even at the University of Michigan, a few of our regent seats are up this year. And I believe it's this Friday, actually, there is a town hall with the candidates for those seats. So that is something that it's very close to home, of course, on our campus, and may be of interest to folks on the call today. And last but not least, our local government. So as folks may be aware, there's a lot of conversation right now, among other things, around the criminal justice system and policing in our communities. So when you're looking at that issue and a lot of other specific issues that may be of interest and may hit close to home, the local level is where folks can have a lot of impact. So in terms of the ballot, again, for folks who are eligible to vote, they'll see some of these positions that are listed here. including a county sheriff, prosecuting attorneys, and local judges. Now, those are positions that are very, very important, but again, oftentimes don't get as much attention as certainly president and vice president, and some of those positions at the federal level, but they're very consequential. And so those are positions to look out for. And if you're talking to folks who will be voting, something to ask them about if they've done their homework on that and what their thoughts are. So those are some really important pieces. And again, whether you are eligible to vote or not, keep an eye out in the coming weeks for candidate forums where you can watch online, get a sense of who's running for which position and where they stand. And that's a great way to be involved and to ask questions and to make your voice and your opinion heard throughout this process. So a quick glance at who and what is on the ballot. And now, again, we'll focus on the path to the presidency because that is really the big piece around the election that most folks are looking at. And so as I mentioned briefly, presidential elections occur every 4 years and they take place on the first Tuesday in November. So of course our presidential election this year is Tuesday, November 3rd, just shy of 4 weeks away. And so the first step to becoming the nominee for a major party, in the US we have a two-party system essentially, Democrats and Republicans. You have primaries and caucuses. So those took place in early 2020. In Michigan, our presidential primary was on March 10th, just before COVID-19 really hit and folks were sent home from campus. So we just squeaked in under the radar there. And then from that point on, political parties will formally select a nominee at their nominating conventions, and those took place over the summer. And those were virtual. Normally they'd be in person with a lot of fanfare, balloons, confetti. Not this year, looked a little different. And then lastly, of course, Americans vote in the general election coming up to elect the president and vice president. Now, in order to be president, what does that even look like? It is required that anyone who were to become president must be a natural born citizen, so someone who was born in the United States. They must be at least 35 years old by the time they take office and have been a US resident for a minimum of 14 years or more. So those are the basic requirements there. And this piece, I'll be happy to share out the presentation. I'll leave to folks to look at in your own time, but this is really a nice visual of what that path to the presidency looks like. Okay, so the Electoral College, this may be something that you've heard some conversation around. And the United States is unique, I think, in terms of its election process, and this is a key piece. So the Electoral College is really the formal body that elects the president and the vice president of the United States. And you'll see here, the Electoral College is actually part of our US Constitution. So there is conversation around, should it stay, should it go? If it were to be abolished completely, that would require an amendment to our Constitution, which is possible, and it is quite a process. So you'll see here, each state gets as many electors to be part of the Electoral College as it has representatives and senators in Congress and in Senate. So in total, there are 538 members of the Electoral College. And so when eligible voters go to vote this year on or in advance of November 3rd, they're essentially empowering members of the Electoral College to cast a vote that reflects how the majority of people in that state have voted. And so in that sense, the people at large are indirectly electing a president and a vice president. And we'll get into that in more detail in a moment. So what on earth does this actually look like? As I mentioned, it's kind of a unique and I would say strange process. And so you'll see here how electors even get nominated. Political parties at the state level will nominate their electors. And so that's generally what that looks like. And you'll have electors for the Republican and the Democratic parties. And then awarding the electoral votes. So in almost all of the states, except for Maine and Nebraska, who use the proportional method, which is described here, most states use a winner-take-all model. So for instance, if the state of Michigan, the popular vote goes to candidate A, the electors would cast their vote in favor of candidate A to represent the votes of the people of their state. So that's generally what that looks like. And again, you'll see Maine and Nebraska use a slightly different process, but 2 out of the 50 states, certainly not anywhere near a majority. So most are using that winner take all format. Okay. And so some historical context. You may have heard that it is possible to lose the popular vote, but ultimately win the Electoral College and therefore become president. This is very true. It's happened 5 times in US history, 3 times back in the 1800s, and twice more recently, within my lifetime and probably the lifetimes of a few folks, at least on the call. This happened in the year 2000. George W. Bush and Al Gore had a very close race. And the results, as you see here, were tied up for several weeks. The Supreme Court ultimately decided the outcome, and it was heavily contested, and it was a very dramatic time. I was young at that point, but still remember it. And then, of course, most recently in 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote across the country by roughly 3 million votes, but wound up losing the Electoral College because in the US, it not only matters how many votes you get, but it matters where those votes come from across the country. And we'll talk about that more in a moment as well. So again, an interesting and a tricky process. So arguments for and against, and these are very basic. There are probably more in-depth arguments. Some folks who feel that we should keep the Electoral College are concerned that abolishing it may increase polarization. It's established in our Constitution. It's been part of our process really since our country was founded. And some folks feel that it does reduce fraud and can minimize a deadlock around the election. And then folks who feel that we should abolish the college really feel strongly that all votes should be considered equal and no state should have an outsized importance or voice in elections. And you'll see some other pieces here. The majority of Americans at this point do favor electing a president through a direct nationwide popular vote, which is the case in the process in many other countries as well. Okay, and so here you'll see, and I know I mentioned just a moment ago, it not only matters how many votes you get, but where those votes are. And so you'll see here, presidential candidates need 270 electoral votes to win the election. So if you're watching the returns on election night, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, what that will look like, you'll be looking for that 270 number. So you'll see probably a map like this. You'll see folks who are watching the results come in say, okay, you know, this candidate is at this number. The other candidate is here. Who gets to 270 first? And that's what we're looking for. So you'll see here, California is the state with the largest number of electoral votes at 55. Texas is not far behind, not surprisingly, also a large state at 38. Michigan has 16 electoral college votes. You'll see Florida has 29 and so on. So it really does vary based on population size in your state in terms of how many electoral college votes your state gets. Okay, so our 2020 voting landscape, what on earth does it look like? We're living in very challenging and uncertain times. So in Michigan specifically, we just got updated numbers yesterday that 2.6 million absentee ballot requests have been submitted. That's a huge number, far more than in years past. And you'll see here the majority of Americans favor allowing voters to vote by mail or absentee ballots. You'll also see in our last mark here, experts are estimating that as many as 70% of all ballots cast this fall will be cast by mail. And so that may result in some delayed results. We may not know who the winner is on election night because of course it does take time to count and process these ballots. Okay, so here's our forecast as best we can. I feel like forecasting anything in 2020 is risky business, but we're gonna just do the best we can. So these are predictions. So key battleground states include Arizona, Florida and Georgia, Michigan of course, Minnesota, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And so for reference, in 2016, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin were all very close in terms of which candidate they went for. So we are one of those 3 states that people are keeping a very close eye on. You'll see Florida in this list. I would also add Ohio. So if you are watching on election night, you're seeing results come in, keep an eye out for Ohio and Florida. Those are always 2 very interesting states to watch. You'll also see here several states with close Senate races. Senators are up for election every 6 years. So those races are usually very intense because it just doesn't come along all that often. And so when that 6-year mark comes about, you'll usually have two very strong candidates going against each other. And last but not least, you'll see national polls are indicating that the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, is favored to win again by way of polls, but that is not nearly ever a guarantee. And so I would say take that with a grain of salt. Okay. So election day concerns, again, you may be hearing about a poll worker shortage. Normally in the United States, folks who work at the polling location, which is where you would physically go to vote, those folks tend to be retirees and of a more advanced age. With COVID-19, there is a major push across the country and in Michigan as well for younger poll workers. And Ann Arbor actually has met its need for poll workers, which is wonderful. And we're still seeing a need in the cities of Detroit and Flint and looking to close that gap. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, unprecedented vote by mail numbers. The U.S. Postal Service has been experiencing some delays, so there are some challenges there. So something to keep an eye out for. You may be hearing that on the news a lot. And again, it will take some time to count these ballots. So I think it's more, usually it would be election night. This year, I would say it's more like election week because it may take some time. Or I could be totally wrong and it will be a clear winner on election night. I just don't know. I wish I did. So you'll also see here misinformation and confusion. So for folks who are on social media, you're probably aware, you're probably hearing, that Facebook, banned a particular group recently across all of its platforms. Sometimes you'll hear of other countries looking to meddle in our elections for various reasons. Sometimes creating, fake videos, fake news, if you will, and putting out inaccurate information, sometimes even about what the date is for election day, and trying to disenfranchise voters and just create confusion. So when you're on social media, checking those sources, making sure friends are as well is really key. There's been talk about, voting by mail being a rigged process. There is not evidence to support that. And so we're also, I think, just unsure of what to expect in terms of rhetoric and conversation around that as we move forward. And so we'll have to keep an ear to the ground. Okay. And tabulating and litigating ballots. I hate to wrap things up on such a sour note. I promise it will get better. There's a lot going on. It's an intense election year. So typically, as I mentioned, news outlets will usually call a race once polls have closed. Usually that's what that looks like. We'll see if that happens on election night. 2020, we will possibly see, unless it's a landslide one way or the other, some litigation or some legal action around possibly counting of ballots, processing, and what that may look like. So again, we may see a clear result election night. We may be in this for weeks or possibly a few months. Okay. And again, just allowing for that time, looking at it as election week or longer, I think is a good way to mentally prepare for what to expect in terms of how to tune into the news and stay updated, but also knowing when to step back and check out, if you will, and take care of yourself if that's a need as well. Okay, so just looking at some past contested elections here, we'll see recently the year 2000 with George W. Bush and Al Gore. This 1960 was interesting to me. I was not aware of this before we did this research. That JFK narrowly beat President Nixon by just 100,000 votes. So that was interesting. I was not familiar with that, and I was just intrigued to see that. Okay, so what we can do in terms of next steps, of course, the election is coming up quickly. For folks who are eligible to vote, if you have friends who are, we do have a city clerk's satellite office open at the U of M Museum of Art. And that's a place, again, where folks who are eligible to vote can go Monday through Friday, 10 to 7. They can get registered, complete, and submit an absentee ballot all in one fell swoop. So you can essentially vote early, and then you're done, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's a goal for us, make sure that everyone is prepared, and if you're eligible, that you voted and you are ready to rock. Okay, and then how to stay engaged. You're welcome to visit our Go Vote site and direct other folks there. You can follow us on Instagram. Tonight, there is the one and only vice presidential debate. It's on all major news networks and it is streaming, so would encourage folks to check that out, discuss it with your peers if you'd like. And then the final two presidential debates are set for October 15th and 22nd. We do know that President Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. So as a result of that, we don't know what is to come with these next two debates, just in terms of his health and whether or not it will be deemed safe enough for him to attend a debate in person. So that's something to keep an ear to the ground for. There may be some updates there. Okay, and that's our UMich Votes Instagram. You can check that out. And you can see here as well our graphic on the satellite office, which is a great place, again, for folks to get registered if they're eligible and get out to vote. And so I hope this information has been helpful. I know it's a lot of information to digest. As I mentioned, this is a particularly heated election year in the United States. And I would encourage folks, again, you know, watch those presidential debates if you can, talk to your peers and classmates, and, you know, engage in ways that feel helpful and healthy for you. And it's okay to take a step back and to check out here and there if you need to as well. So do what feels best and most beneficial for you. That would be my guidance. So I will stop talking at you from there, and Kelly, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, that was, I mean, it's a lot of information. So what we want to do now, I'm going to stop the recording so that we can kind of get into this discussion section.